You never know when the person you help today might be the one who changes your life tomorrow. The sandwich was small, barely enough for one person. And yet, on that cold Chicago evening, it was all Sarah Collins had left. The wind swept through the narrow streets between brick buildings, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust fumes. Neon signs flickered above convenience stores and diners preparing to close for the night. Cars rolled past with their headlights glowing through the mist, while pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks with their heads down and their hands buried deep inside their coats. Sarah pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself as she stepped out of the grocery store. In one hand, she carried a worn canvas tote. In the other, a wrapped turkey sandwich she had purchased with the last few dollars in her checking account. It had been a long day, longer than most. She had spent 8 hours cleaning offices downtown before rushing across town to pick up her 7-year-old son, Ethan, from an after-school program. After helping him with homework, preparing him for bed, and reassuring him that everything would be okay despite the overdue bills stacked on the kitchen counter, she had quietly slipped back outside to buy something small to eat. She had smiled for her son. She always did. But now, walking alone beneath the glow of the streetlights, exhaustion settled heavily into her bones. Sarah was 32 years old, a single mother who measured success differently than most people. For her, success meant keeping the lights on another month. It meant making sure Ethan never went to school hungry. It meant finding enough strength to wake up each morning and keep moving forward, no matter how difficult life became. The city around her never seemed to notice people like Sarah. The skyscrapers sparkled with wealth high above the streets. Expensive restaurants buzzed with laughter. Luxury cars glided past. Yet beneath all that success were thousands of people fighting silent battles nobody could see. Sarah was one of them. As she crossed an intersection, a gust of cold wind cut through her jacket. She shivered and looked down at the sandwich in her hand. She had not eaten since noon. Her stomach reminded her of that fact every few steps. Just one more block, she thought. Then she could finally sit down, take a breath, and enjoy the simple meal she had been looking forward to all evening. But fate has a strange way of interrupting plans. Halfway down the next block, Sarah noticed someone sitting alone near the entrance of a closed bookstore. At first, she almost kept walking. The city was full of strangers. Most people learn not to stop, not to stare, not to get involved. Yet something about this man caught her attention. He sat perfectly still beneath the awning, his shoulders slightly hunched against the cold. His clothes were damp from the misty weather. His face looked tired, not just physically tired, the kind of tired that came from carrying too much for too long. Sarah slowed her pace. The man stared down at the sidewalk, unaware that anyone was watching him. A few people passed by without a glance. Others looked briefly before continuing on. The city moved around him as if he were invisible. Sarah understood that feeling better than most. For a moment she stood there, uncertain. She looked at the sandwich, then at the stranger, then back at the sandwich again. Common sense told her to keep walking. She needed that food. She had earned it. Nobody would blame her for continuing home. Yet another voice whispered inside her heart. A quieter voice. The voice her mother used to speak with years ago before she passed away. Kindness matters most when it costs you something. Sarah swallowed hard. The memory arrived unexpectedly. Warm, familiar, painful. She remembered being a little girl at a bus stop when her mother had shared their last snack with someone who looked hungry. At the time, Sarah had not understood. Later she never forgot it. The stranger finally lifted his head. Their eyes met for only a second. But in that second, Sarah saw something she recognized immediately. Loneliness. The kind no amount of money, success, or pride could hide. She took a deep breath, stepped forward, and walked toward the man, still holding the last sandwich she had in the world. The man looked up as Sarah approached, and for a brief moment neither of them spoke. The city continued moving around them. Traffic lights changed colors. A bus sighed to a stop half a block away. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed through the damp night air. But beneath the awning of that closed bookstore, the world seemed strangely quiet. Sarah stopped a few feet away and held out the wrapped sandwich. The stranger blinked as if he was not sure he had heard her correctly. "You should take this," she said softly. His eyes shifted from her face to the sandwich in her hand. "No," he replied after a moment. "You keep it." His voice was calm, but rough with fatigue. Sarah noticed how carefully he chose his words. He did not sound angry. He did not sound embarrassed. He simply sounded exhausted. I am okay, she lied. You look like you need it more than I do. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Not a happy smile. The kind that appears when someone has forgotten how to receive kindness. You do not even know me, he said. Sarah shrugged lightly. Maybe not. But everybody gets hungry. For a second, neither moved. Then the man accepted the sandwich. His fingers tightened around the paper wrapping as though it were something far more valuable. Sarah noticed his hands. Clean. Well cared for. Not the hands of someone who usually spent nights sitting on cold sidewalks. She noticed the watch hidden beneath the sleeve of his coat as well. Expensive. The kind she had only seen in magazine advertisements displayed near checkout counters. Yet she did not ask questions. Life had taught her that appearances rarely told the full story. The stranger looked down at the sandwich again. Thank you, he said quietly. The words seemed heavier than they should have been. Sarah nodded. You are welcome. She started to turn away, but something made her pause. Do you have somewhere safe to go tonight? The man hesitated. His eyes drifted toward the dark street before returning to her. I will figure something out. It was not really an answer. Sarah could tell. Yet she also recognized the look of someone protecting a private struggle. She understood that too. Some burdens people carried alone. Well, she said gently, I hope tomorrow is better than today. This time the smile that crossed his face looked genuine. Small, grateful, almost surprised. I hope tomorrow is better for you too. Sarah gave a short wave before continuing toward home. The cold air felt sharper now that she no longer had the sandwich. Her stomach protested immediately. She ignored it. 1 block became 2, then 3. As she walked, she replayed the encounter in her mind. Part of her wondered whether she had made the right decision. Another part already knew she had. By the time she reached her apartment building, the lights from the upper floors glowed warmly through rain-speckled windows. The building was old and tired. Paint peeled from the railings. The elevator worked only when it felt like cooperating. But it was home. Sarah climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and quietly unlocked the door. Inside, the small apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. She stepped into Ethan's room first. The boy was asleep beneath a blanket decorated with faded rockets and planets. One arm hung over the side of the bed. His brown hair fell across his forehead. Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion. Every difficult day became easier when she looked at him. She gently pulled the blanket higher around his shoulders before turning off the hallway light. Later, sitting alone at the kitchen table, Sarah poured herself a glass of water. The stack of bills remained exactly where she had left them. Rent, utilities, medical expenses from Ethan's asthma treatments. Numbers that never seemed to stop growing. She stared at them for a long moment before pushing them aside. Worry would still be there tomorrow. Tonight she was too tired. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the window. Sarah rested her head against the back of her chair and closed her eyes. Somewhere across the city, she wondered whether the stranger had found a warm place to spend the night. Then she laughed quietly to herself. It was a strange thing to think about when her own life felt so uncertain. Yet she could not help it. Sometimes kindness creates invisible connections between people who may never meet again. And as midnight settled over Chicago, neither Sarah nor the stranger could possibly know that their brief encounter beneath that bookstore awning was already setting something extraordinary into motion. The next morning, Sarah woke to the soft glow of sunrise filtering through the thin curtains. The city outside was just beginning to stir. Car engines hummed in the distance, and the rhythmic clatter of delivery trucks echoed along the streets. Ethan was still asleep, curled beneath his blanket, his small chest rising and falling in steady breaths. Sarah quietly stepped into the kitchen, careful not to wake him. The sandwich wrapper from last night had been tossed in the trash, leaving only the memory of her choice lingering in the air. She poured herself a cup of coffee, the aroma filling the cramped apartment, and sat by the window, staring at the world outside. She had no idea that the stranger she had helped was already moving through his day, affected by the kindness of a complete stranger. The memory of the moment beneath the bookstore awning played repeatedly in her mind. The way his eyes had softened, the quiet sigh he had let out when he accepted the sandwich, the hesitant smile that had seemed to weigh 1,000 unspoken words. She did not know his name, his story, or how his life might have been complicated by the events that led him to sit there alone on the wet sidewalk. Yet somehow, she felt a connection, a thread woven between 2 lives. unseen by the rest of the bustling city, fragile, yet undeniably real. After finishing her coffee, Sarah prepared breakfast for Ethan, carefully slicing bread, warming milk, and setting it all on the small table in the corner of their kitchen. The routine was familiar, comforting, yet each movement felt heavier with anticipation, though she could not articulate why. She glanced at the clock, noting that it was still early. Time seemed to stretch differently in the quiet hours of the morning, carrying a weight she could not yet name. As Ethan stirred and rubbed his eyes awake, Sarah smiled, her heart lifting despite the fatigue that clung to her shoulders. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she whispered softly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. He blinked up at her, confusion giving way to the recognition of comfort, and smiled in return. They ate together, the sounds of clinking dishes and quiet conversation filling the kitchen in a gentle rhythm. Sarah thought about the day ahead, her work schedule, the errands, the bills, yet the anxiety that usually accompanied these thoughts was tempered by the memory of what she had done last night. The act of giving, small though it was, had shifted something inside her, something intangible yet powerful. She left the kitchen to tidy up, stacking plates, wiping counters, her mind drifting to the streets where the stranger had been. She wondered where he was now, whether he had a warm place to go, a hot meal to eat, and whether the ripple of her choice had already begun to touch his life in ways she could not foresee. By mid-morning, Sarah prepared to leave for her first job, gathering her bag, checking on Ethan, and making sure he had everything he needed. She paused for a moment at the door, hand on the handle, and allowed herself a small, private moment of hope. Perhaps today would bring something unexpected. Perhaps the world was already shifting in ways she could not yet see. As she stepped out onto the sidewalk, the sun had climbed higher, reflecting off wet streets and glinting against windows. The city was alive with motion, people hurrying to work, shops opening their doors, the distant sound of laughter and conversation mingling with the hum of traffic. Sarah walked with measured steps, aware of the weight of her responsibilities yet buoyed by the quiet satisfaction of having acted with compassion. Somewhere ahead, in the maze of streets and buildings, the man she had helped was already making his way through the city. Perhaps he would remember her gesture. Perhaps it would inspire him in some way, whether he knew it or not. The idea filled her with a warmth that contrasted with the crisp morning air. Life, she realized, had a way of connecting people in unseen ways, and sometimes the smallest decisions carried consequences far beyond imagination. As she approached the corner where she would catch the bus to her first job, Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the city around her, the hum of possibility in every passing face, every moving car, every flickering neon sign. And though she did not know it yet, today would mark the beginning of a series of events that neither she nor the man beneath the bookstore awning could have predicted, all set in motion by one act of simple kindness, unfolding quietly but inevitably in the vast, bustling city that held so many lives, so many stories, waiting to intersect in the most extraordinary ways. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting thin stripes of light across the worn wooden floor of Sarah Collins's apartment. She had just returned from her second job, the one at the small neighborhood grocery store, carrying a bag filled with essentials for the week. The streets had been alive with the usual hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, and the occasional bark of a dog somewhere in a nearby alley. The city moved without pause, indifferent to the quiet dramas unfolding on its sidewalks. Sarah carefully set the bag down on the counter and leaned for a moment against the kitchen table, closing her eyes and allowing herself a brief pause from the constant rhythm of responsibility. Ethan was in his room, working on a drawing, his small hands moving carefully with crayons, the colors bright against the white paper. Sarah watched from the doorway, a soft smile touching her lips. She thought of the stranger from the night before, the man who had accepted her last sandwich without hesitation, and wondered where he might be now, whether he had found a warm place to rest or a kind hand to guide him through the day. There was a curiosity in her that she could not easily define, a sense that their lives had intersected in a way that carried weight far beyond the brief moment they had shared. She shook her head lightly, refocusing on the present. The apartment needed attention, small things that kept their world functioning despite the constant pressure of bills and responsibilities. Sarah began tidying the kitchen, washing dishes with careful movements, her mind wandering to the quiet satisfaction of having acted with kindness. Each plate rinsed and each counter wiped seemed to echo the sentiment she carried within her. Small acts, sometimes unseen, could hold profound significance. Outside, the city continued to pulse with energy. Cars honked in the distance. The hum of the elevated train rattled through the streets, and the voices of people walking by drifted faintly through the thin walls. It was a world that rarely paused, yet within it, Sarah had carved a moment of stillness, a choice that belonged entirely to her. She turned to Ethan, who had now laid his crayons down and was looking up at her expectantly. "Dinner will be ready soon," she said, her voice calm but warm. The boy nodded, settling back into his chair, and she could see the quiet trust in his eyes. That trust, fragile and precious, reminded her of why every decision mattered, why every act of compassion, no matter how small, had significance. After preparing their modest meal, Sarah and Ethan sat together at the table, eating in companionable silence, punctuated only by the occasional clatter of utensils and the distant murmur of the city. The simple routine carried a weight of normalcy she cherished, a grounding after the uncertainty and the unpredictability of life. Later, as she cleared the plates, Sarah allowed herself to linger on a thought that had not left her since the previous night. The idea that one small act could ripple outward in ways she could not see. Somewhere beyond the walls of her apartment, the man she had helped was moving through the city, carrying with him the impact of her decision. Perhaps he would remember her, perhaps he would not. Yet the knowledge that her choice had mattered, that it had made a difference in that brief moment, filled her with a quiet hope. It was a hope that she tucked carefully within herself, like a small ember waiting for the right moment to ignite. The evening settled in, soft and golden, casting long shadows across the room. Sarah sat for a moment by the window, watching as pedestrians hurried past, lights flickering in the distance, and the city breathed around her. She felt a profound sense of interconnectedness, of lives moving in invisible threads toward unknown intersections. And as she looked at her sleeping son, she understood that the choices she made, grounded in empathy and courage, were not merely acts of survival, but seeds of possibility, waiting for the right moment to bloom in ways she could not yet imagine. The following morning arrived wrapped in silver clouds and cool spring air. Sarah was halfway through her shift cleaning offices downtown when her phone vibrated inside her apron pocket. At first she ignored it. Personal calls during work usually meant a problem she could not afford. But when it rang a second time, she stepped into an empty hallway and glanced at the screen. The number was unfamiliar. She hesitated before answering. "Hello." A calm female voice responded immediately. "Good morning. May I speak with Sarah Collins?" Sarah straightened slightly. "This is Sarah." There was a brief pause. "My name is Lauren Hayes. I work for Thornton Global Enterprises. Mr. Michael Thornton would like to meet with you this afternoon if possible." Sarah frowned. The name meant nothing to her. The company sounded familiar, but she could not place it. "I think you may have the wrong person," she replied carefully. "No, Miss Collins. We are looking for you specifically." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. Thornton Global was one of the largest companies in the country. She had seen its logo on skyscrapers, television commercials, and business magazines while waiting in grocery store checkout lines. Why would anyone from a company like that call her? "What is this regarding?" she asked. Again the woman paused. Mr. Thornton would prefer to explain that personally. Sarah almost laughed. Rich executives did not request meetings with single mothers who cleaned office buildings for hourly wages. The entire situation felt unreal. "I cannot take time off work," she said. "I understand. Mr. Thornton is willing to meet wherever is most convenient for you." The conversation ended politely, but the uneasiness remained. For the rest of the day, Sarah struggled to focus. As she wiped conference tables and emptied trash bins, her thoughts kept returning to the mysterious call. By lunchtime, she finally searched the company online using her phone. The moment she saw the photograph, her breath caught. There was no mistake. The man staring back from the screen was the stranger from beneath the bookstore awning. Michael Thornton, founder and chief executive officer of Thornton Global Enterprises. Estimated net worth, several $billion. Sarah stared at the image in disbelief. The tailored suit, the confident smile, the polished public image. None of it resembled the exhausted man who had sat alone in the cold, holding her sandwich. Her pulse quickened. Suddenly, dozens of questions flooded her mind. Why had he been there that night? Why had he looked so defeated? And most importantly, why was he trying to find her now? Hours later, Sarah finished work and hurried home to check on Ethan before heading to the meeting location Lauren had provided. It was not a luxury hotel or a corporate office tower. It was a small neighborhood cafe less than 10 minutes from her apartment. The choice surprised her. It felt intentional, thoughtful. As she approached the cafe, her hands felt unusually cold. Through the front window, she could see customers sipping coffee and working on laptops. Then she spotted him. Michael Thornton sat alone near the back corner. This time he looked very different. His suit was immaculate, his posture confident. Several people in the cafe glanced toward him without realizing who he was. Yet when he noticed Sarah entering, he immediately stood. Not like a billionaire greeting an employee. Not like an executive meeting a stranger. Like a man genuinely grateful to see someone. Sarah stopped a few feet away. For a moment neither spoke. Then Michael smiled. It was the same smile she had seen beneath the bookstore awning, only lighter now. More alive. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. Sarah folded her arms. "I almost did not." Michael nodded as if he understood completely. "I would not have blamed you." She looked directly into his eyes. "You are Michael Thornton." "I am. And you were the man sitting outside that bookstore." His expression softened. "Yes." Sarah shook her head slowly. "I do not understand." Michael glanced down briefly before looking back at her. The confidence that made investors trust him and competitors fear him seemed to disappear for just a second. What remained was something much more human. "That," he said softly, "is exactly why I hoped you would come. Because there is a story you deserve to hear. And it begins with the sandwich you handed me when almost nobody else would even stop walking." Sarah slowly lowered herself into the chair across from Michael Thornton. The sounds of the cafe seemed distant now, reduced to the soft hiss of an espresso machine and the quiet murmur of conversations happening far away. Her attention remained fixed on the man sitting across from her. 24 hours earlier, she had believed he was simply a stranger having the worst night of his life. Now she was learning that he was one of the most influential business leaders in the country. Michael folded his hands on the table. For several seconds, he appeared to be searching for the right words. 3 months ago, everything looked perfect from the outside, he began. The company was growing. Investors were happy. Every magazine article said, "I was winning." He gave a faint smile that disappeared almost immediately. But sometimes success creates a very convincing illusion. Sarah listened quietly. Michael looked through the cafe window toward the busy Chicago street outside. "I spent years building Thornton Global. Every hour, every decision, every sacrifice. I convinced myself it was all necessary." His voice remained calm, but there was something heavier beneath it. "Then one morning I realized I could not remember the last time I had eaten dinner with my family. I could not remember the last time I had taken a full day off. I could not remember the last time I felt genuinely happy." Sarah did not interrupt. She knew what exhaustion sounded like. She lived with her own version of it every day. Michael continued. "Last week, my board approved another major expansion. Everyone celebrated. They called it a historic achievement." He laughed quietly. "That night, I went home and sat alone in a house with more rooms than I could count. And for the first time in years, I felt completely empty." Sarah noticed his eyes lower toward the table. "The night we met, I had been walking for hours. No security team, no assistants, no meetings. I just needed to disappear for a while." He paused. "Do you know what surprised me?" Sarah shook her head. Michael looked directly at her. "Nobody noticed." The words landed with unexpected weight. "Thousands of people passed me. Some looked away. Some glanced for a second. Most never slowed down." His expression softened. "Then you stopped." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "I only gave you a sandwich." Michael smiled gently. "That is exactly why it mattered." He leaned back slightly. "You did not know who I was. You were not trying to impress anyone. There were no cameras. No publicity. No advantage for you." His voice grew quieter. "You helped because you saw another human being sitting alone." Sarah found herself looking down at her hands. She had never considered the moment extraordinary. To her, it had been a simple choice. Difficult, perhaps, but simple. Michael reached into his jacket and carefully removed a folded piece of paper. He placed it on the table between them. Sarah glanced at it without touching it. "What is that?" she asked. "A report." She looked confused. Michael nodded. Yesterday morning, I asked my team to learn everything they could about the woman who gave away her last meal. Sarah immediately frowned. You investigated me? Only enough to understand who you are. His expression became serious. And what I found humbled me. Sarah remained silent. Michael tapped the paper lightly. Single mother. 2 jobs. Outstanding employment record. No complaints from any employer. Medical expenses for your son. Overdue bills. Constant pressure. He looked at her carefully. And despite all of that, you still chose kindness. Sarah felt emotion tightening her throat. Not because of the information. Because someone had finally noticed the struggle she worked so hard to hide. Michael's voice softened even further. Most people think character appears when life is easy. I think character appears when life is difficult. For a moment, neither spoke. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the cafe windows, casting warm reflections across the table. Then Michael smiled again, but this time there was something different behind it. A sense of purpose. A decision already made. Sarah, he said quietly, I did not ask you here simply to tell you my story. I asked you here because what happened that night changed something inside me. And I intend to make sure it changes your life too. Sarah stared at him, unsure whether she had heard him correctly. The words seemed to linger between them, suspended in the warm air of the cafe. For a moment, all she could do was blink. Change my life? She repeated softly. Michael nodded. There was no arrogance in his expression, no dramatic flourish, just quiet certainty. He reached into a leather portfolio resting beside his chair and removed a second folder. Unlike the report, this one appeared carefully prepared. He slid it across the table. Sarah hesitated before opening it. Inside were several pages, neatly organized and professionally printed. She scanned the first page, then the second. Her eyes widened. The documents outlined a full educational scholarship fund for Ethan through college. Another section detailed a financial assistance program that would immediately eliminate her outstanding medical debt related to her son's treatments. A third page described a management training position within a Thornton Global Community Initiative, a role offering a salary greater than she had earned in years. Sarah looked up quickly. This cannot be real. Michael smiled. It is. She shook her head. Why would you do this? Michael folded his hands. Because I spent years rewarding performance while overlooking character. His voice remained calm. Last night reminded me that the most valuable people are not always the ones standing on stages or sitting in boardrooms. Sarah lowered her eyes toward the documents again. Her heart pounded inside her chest. Every page represented a solution to problems that had followed her for years. Problems she had quietly carried alone. Rent, medical bills, future tuition, the constant fear of falling one unexpected expense away from disaster. She felt overwhelmed, not by the money, by the fact that someone had finally seen the struggle behind her smile. Michael continued, I cannot repay kindness. Nobody can, but I can honor it. The sunlight shifted across the table as afternoon shadows lengthened outside. Sarah looked out the cafe window for a moment. Pedestrians continued moving along the sidewalks. Cars rolled past. Life continued exactly as it always had. Yet somehow everything felt different. You do not owe me anything, she said quietly. Michael nodded. I know. His answer came instantly. That is exactly why this matters. Sarah felt emotion rising unexpectedly. She thought about the countless nights spent worrying after Ethan had fallen asleep. The time she skipped meals so he could have enough. The birthdays celebrated on tiny budgets. The sacrifices nobody ever noticed because there was never time to explain them. She had never expected recognition. She certainly had never expected this. Michael leaned forward slightly. Can I tell you something? Sarah nodded. When I was 24 years old, I started my company with a borrowed desk and a dream that most people laughed at. He smiled faintly. Back then, a stranger gave me an opportunity when I had absolutely nothing to offer in return. His eyes softened. I never forgot it. Sarah listened carefully. That opportunity changed my future. Not because of the money involved. Because somebody believed I mattered. Silence settled briefly between them. Then Michael looked directly at her. Last night, you reminded me of that lesson. Sarah closed the folder slowly. Her hands trembled. For the first time in years, the future did not feel like a wall she was constantly pushing against. It felt like a road opening in front of her. A road she had been too exhausted to imagine. Michael stood and extended his hand. There is one condition. Sarah raised an eyebrow. A condition? He laughed softly. Yes. What is it? Michael's smile widened. Promise me you will never stop being the person who gave away her last meal when she could have kept it for herself. Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes. Not tears of sadness. Relief. Gratitude. Hope. She rose from her chair and shook his hand. Outside the cafe, the city continued its endless motion, unaware that two lives had just been transformed by a simple decision made beneath a bookstore awning on a rainy Chicago night. The days that followed felt almost unreal to Sarah. Every morning, she woke expecting the entire experience to reveal itself as a misunderstanding, some elaborate mistake that would disappear the moment she opened her eyes. Yet each day brought new confirmation that what had happened inside that small cafe was real. The scholarship fund for Ethan was established exactly as promised. The medical bills that had haunted her kitchen table for years began disappearing one by one. Meetings with Thornton Global representatives introduced her to people who treated her with a level of respect she was not accustomed to receiving. Not because of what she had done for Michael Thornton, but because Michael insisted they understand who she was. Meanwhile, Ethan noticed the change before anyone else. Children often recognize hope long before adults allow themselves to believe it. One evening, he sat at the kitchen table working on homework when he looked up and asked a simple question. Mom, why are you smiling so much lately? Sarah laughed softly. She had not realized she was smiling more. Yet now that he mentioned it, she understood. For the first time in years, her mind was not consumed by fear every waking hour. The future no longer felt like a constant emergency. It felt possible. A few weeks later, Michael invited Sarah and Ethan to attend a community event sponsored by his company. The gathering took place in a renovated neighborhood center on Chicago's South Side. Families filled the building. Children ran through hallways decorated with colorful artwork. Volunteers served meals. Local business owners shared stories about programs that had helped their communities grow. Sarah expected a formal corporate event. Instead, she found something much more personal. As she moved through the crowd, people greeted Michael warmly. Not because he was a billionaire, because they genuinely knew him. He stopped to shake hands, listen to concerns, and remember names. Watching him interact with others, Sarah began understanding something important. The man she had met beneath the bookstore awning was not separate from the successful executive everyone admired. He was the same person. One side simply spent years hidden behind pressure, expectations, and responsibility. During the event, a local reporter approached Michael and asked what inspired the company's newest community initiatives. The question seemed routine. The kind executives answered every day. But Michael surprised everyone. He glanced toward Sarah standing near Ethan and smiled. Kindness, he replied. The reporter looked confused. Michael continued. Sometimes people think major change begins with massive investments or complicated strategies. Sometimes it begins with one person choosing to care when nobody is watching. Sarah immediately looked down, uncomfortable with the attention. Yet the story spread quickly. Local newspapers covered the event. Several articles mentioned the anonymous single mother whose generosity had inspired a renewed commitment to community programs. Her name was never highlighted. Michael made sure of that. He understood that true kindness does not seek applause. Yet the message resonated. Donations increased. Volunteers signed up. Businesses launched partnerships supporting struggling families. What began as one sandwich quietly expanded into opportunities for hundreds of people. One afternoon, several months later, Sarah stood outside Ethan's school waiting to pick him up. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves. Children poured from the building laughing and talking about homework, sports, and weekend plans. Ethan spotted her immediately and ran over carrying a folder filled with assignments. Mom, he said excitedly, my teacher asked what person inspires me most. Sarah smiled. What did you tell her? Ethan thought for a moment. Then he answered with complete certainty. I said kindness. Sarah felt her throat tighten. She looked toward the golden sunlight stretching across the sidewalk and realized something extraordinary. Michael Thornton had changed her life. But the true miracle was that her small act of compassion had changed his life first. And together, those two changes had created something neither of them could have imagined on that rainy night outside the bookstore. Years later, people would tell the story differently. Some would focus on the billionaire. Others would focus on the opportunity, the scholarship, the new career, or the community programs that followed. But the truth was much simpler than that. The story was never really about money. It was about a choice. One evening, nearly 2 years after their first meeting, Sarah stood outside a newly opened community learning center funded through a partnership between Thornton Global and local organizations. Children filled the building behind her. Laughter echoed through the hallways. Parents attended workshops. Students explored computer labs and reading rooms that had not existed before. On the wall near the entrance hung a small plaque. It did not mention wealth. It did not celebrate business success. Instead, it displayed a simple message. One act of kindness can travel farther than you ever imagine. Sarah smiled every time she read it. Ethan, now taller and more confident, had become one of the center's most enthusiastic volunteers. He helped younger children with homework and spent weekends assisting families who needed support. Watching him interact with others reminded Sarah that kindness was not something a person possessed. It was something a person practiced. And practice had a way of becoming legacy. That evening, Michael arrived quietly without an entourage or announcement. He walked through the building greeting volunteers and families by name. When he reached Sarah, they shared the kind of smile reserved for people who understand a chapter of life nobody else fully witnessed. "Looks different from that bookstore sidewalk," Michael said with a laugh. Sarah laughed too. A little. They stood together watching children run through the center. The sunset poured golden light through the windows, painting the walls with warm colors. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Michael asked a question. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you kept the sandwich?" Sarah thought about it. She remembered the cold rain, the empty feeling in her stomach, the hesitation she had felt before walking toward a stranger. "Sometimes," she admitted. Michael nodded slowly. "So do I." The answer carried more meaning than either needed to explain. Across the room, Ethan was helping a young student solve a math problem. The child suddenly smiled with excitement after finding the answer. The reaction spread instantly. One smile became 2, then 3, then laughter. Sarah watched the moment unfold and realized it perfectly reflected everything that had happened since that rainy night. Kindness rarely stops where it begins. It moves. It grows. It reaches people the original giver may never even meet. Michael followed her gaze toward Ethan. "You know," he said quietly, "everyone thinks your sandwich changed my life." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Did it not?" Michael smiled. "It did, but not because it fed me that night." He looked around the center. "It reminded me of who I wanted to be before success became more important than people." Sarah felt emotion rise inside her chest. Not sadness, not even gratitude. Something deeper. The quiet understanding that every human life touches others in ways impossible to measure. The city outside continued moving as it always had. Cars flowed through intersections. Streetlights flickered on one by one. Thousands of strangers passed each other without knowing the stories they carried. Yet somewhere among those ordinary moments existed opportunities to change a life forever. Not through wealth, not through power, through compassion. As evening settled over Chicago, Sarah stood beside her son and her friend, looking at a future that once felt unreachable. She had not been rich. She had not been influential. She had not possessed anything extraordinary except the willingness to care when it would have been easier not to. And in the end, that had been enough. Because the greatest transformations rarely begin with grand gestures. Sometimes they begin with a tired single mother, a rainy sidewalk, and a simple decision to share what little she had. And long after the sandwich was gone, the kindness remained.